So if you remember back to when we first started talking about views and we looked at the request, we could see that there's a user associated to that request. So if I did print request.user, this is going to tell me who the user is. So let's actually jump into our project. Let's make sure the server is running. And we refresh in here. And what I see is I got two things. So let's actually get rid of that other print statement. And in fact, I'm going to get rid of all these other notes too. We don't need those anymore. We save it. If I refresh in here, I should see CFE. So my user that's logged into the admin, I'm going to open up a new tab with the local host going. Go into the admin. I have a user actually logged in, right? CFE is the user that's logged in. If I log out, I refresh in here. It now says anonymous user, meaning user is not logged in. So there's a few methods I can actually do in here for that specifically. So if I say if request.user.is_authenticated print logged in, otherwise print not logged in. We save that, we refresh in here, we see that it says not logged in. Cool, so those are a couple different methods that we could do. So this is also a good opportunity to change our context, right? So we can change our template and our context if we wanted to. So let's just say I'm going to change the template. If they're authenticated, I'm going to have them being the list view. If they're not authenticated, I'll just say list view public, like a non-authenticated list view. And then the query set, I'm still going to keep the same. So I'll leave that up here. And then the context, I will also keep the same. So I will also leave it up here. The reason I put this request user authenticated stuff last is because if I wanted to change the context in the future, I could do so in here. And that would actually change it for this variable point right here. But I don't need to change it, and I'm not going to. So I save this and refresh in here. I now have this view does not exist. Now, of course, I would have to actually create this view. So in migrations, in templates, we go in here, make that new file, and we're going to call it listviewpublic.html, and I'll just say hello there, and that's it. I'm not going to really put anything else in there. Refresh, and now it says hello there. So there is one step further that we could go with this, and that is called a decorator, meaning I can, instead of having a template that is being shown or raising something like a 404 error, so I can actually import HTTP 404, which is a shorthand way to get a 404 error, so I can raise HTTP 404. I can refresh in here and notice it says this page not found. That, of course, is different than what we did with the response stuff where we could have changed the status code. It's still raising the 404, but it's doing a actual built-in Django 404. Okay, so we could do something like this. If it's not authenticated, we can have them raise the 404, or we could change the template, just like we did. There's another thing that we could do is we could require this view to have the user log in to actually do that. We're going to do that using something called a decorator. Now, the login required decorator means that the user has to be logged in to see this particular view. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this URL, or actually this import, and it's fairly straightforward. Django.contrib.auth.decorators import login required. And then we just do @login required here. We save that. Still logged out. So if I refresh in here, notice it redirected me to accounts login with the next URL being blog. So accounts login is the default URL login. So if I just change it to login URL to login right there and refresh on that page, let's go back to blog, it will now take me to that particular URL. I can also do this by default by overriding the default in settings to login URL, and we change it to login like that. And then going back into my view, getting rid of this, cutting that out, save it, refresh in the blog page. It should actually bring us back to that. So that's something that we can do. There are a few other parameters that you might want, like redirect field name. So what field name that you actually use to redirect to, but also the login URL is one that is very useful. So as far as the actual login component, so where like building a form that does this login stuff, that's not something we're going to cover in this one. That is several of the projects we actually do cover a login form and also user registration. And those things require a full project to understand the whole context of how that stuff works. So it's not something we'll cover at this point. But the main thing here is we've got this login required decorator, and as well as seeing how we can update our view or change the way our view looks based on what the user is. So if they're authenticated, they'll see one thing. If they're not authenticated, they'll see another thing. Do keep in mind that if I took out this login required here, I did the raise 404, but I can also do return HTTP response redirect. Of course, I would have to actually import the HTTP response redirect. And then I could do the same thing like this and go back into login. So I can absolutely do something like that. There's no problem there, but I just wanted to show you a few different ways on how you can handle the person or the user not being logged in with. So I'm going to leave it as this for your own actual like notes, but I'm not going to actually keep it there because that's not really how we're going to go forward with this particular view. So the view itself, we are going to leave as the list view like we did to start it with, but I'm going to go ahead and get rid of a lot of those other things, and we'll just call this a login required view. Okay, so if you have any questions on what we did here, let us know. Otherwise, let's keep going.